And luxury, guys, is subjective, right? Like when one person walks into a luxury property, they're like, whoa, this is luxurious. Another person could walk in and go, yeah, this is great. Like, it's good. Is it luxurious? Probably not. But so it's subjective. And that's one of the reasons why we usually recommend for hosts not to necessarily use the word luxurious. You don't want there to be any ambiguity in your listing. Like, I think that that's very important. Right. Like, if there's something that could be held subjectively, that needs to come out. Because anything that's subjective, again, you're kind of setting yourself up for potential problems with guests that you have.
Welcome to STR Unlocked, a podcast for driven vacation rental investors looking to gain the freedom that comes with an abundance of time and money.
I'm April.
And I'm Nathan.
Our life is busy with 3 small children, full-time jobs, and not nearly enough coffee. And we're unlocking success with short-term rental investing every single day. Join us in our journey as we learn and grow together.
If we can do it, so can you.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of STR Unlocked. We're glad that you're here with us today. This episode is going to be a really, really interesting one. Whenever we travel with our family, we always go and we always try our best to stay at an Airbnb if we can, or a short-term rental if we can. First off, because we kind of want to support the industry and we want to support other hosts, which is a huge deal to us. But also because it gives us a chance to learn, right? Like, we get to experience how other hosts are doing things and how they approach, their rentals. And so we went with our family to the beach, and it was really a great vacation. It ended up being a great vacation, but it didn't start that way. It didn't start that way. I want to give you kind of an overall view of what happened, and then April can kind of start digging in just a little bit. Because what we learned was, a lot of times a short-term rental can oftentimes not meet the expectation of the person who booked it. This rental in particular didn't meet our expectations, which was really, really interesting. This is probably the first time this has ever happened to us. Yeah. Like, we're not incredibly picky people, but there are certain things that make us feel very uncomfortable, right? And I think that this rental was a good example of the pictures looked cute. The interior design was great, right? Like the way they had designed from a visual standpoint was really great. It was functional. It was a 2-bedroom beach house. It was actually a duplex, or it was a house that they had split into 2 different units. And so we were staying in the bottom unit, which is totally fine. But when we walked in, there was a number of things that really started to make us really, really uncomfortable that April's going to talk about in a second. But what was really interesting about it, though, was that we ended up the first night leaving, or not the first night, but the next day we ended up leaving. So we only stayed one night. We were supposed to stay 3 nights.
3 nights.
We were supposed to stay 3 nights, and I think it was like an average of about $533 a night, which isn't incredibly expensive, but it's also not cheap, right? I think most people would agree it's a pretty hefty price per night for a rental, right? And so we ended up contacting the host next day, which I will say the host was great.
He was phenomenal.
Yeah. Like, he was really great. And we basically just contacted him and say, hey, we don't think that this is working out for us. We've already booked another place. And I think we sent him a screenshot of the other place that we booked. And we said, we're leaving today. And then he ended up refunding us the other 2 nights that we were supposed to be there. So in our eyes, the place was rough enough for us and our family and our situation that we ended up choosing to leave, right? We ended up choosing not to stay past that first night. So tell everybody just a little bit, like, what was the experience that we had when we walked in?
Yeah. So, I mean, really the first thing that kind of caught our attention was just how unfinished it was, which isn't a big deal. Like, it's the beach. Like, we were there for the beach. So that in and of itself certainly wasn't a reason for us to leave.
It's not a big deal.
Right. It's not a big deal. But we walked in, there was like a porch on the very front, and some of the locks on the windows were broken. So, from the very start, we were kind of concerned that the locks were broken. And it wasn't just that the locks were old and they were falling apart, like literally like screws pulling out, like not sure what happened there, but they were broken.
It looks like somebody had tried to break into the rental, or somebody had tried to force the window open when the lock was closed, or was locked or whatever.
Right. So, I mean, again, like, kind of a big deal, but we could overlook it. Like, it's not like you could easily lift the windows, right? Like, there was still some security there. But then we walked in and we saw that there weren't any blinds on the windows. And this is around other beach homes. It wasn't a secluded location. There weren't any blinds.
They had like sheer curtains,
there were some sheer curtains
that you could pull, but obviously at night you could see straight through them. So there really wasn't any privacy, which again, in and of itself, isn't that big of a deal.
It's not that big of a deal. It would have been one of those things where we would have just sent a message to the host to give them a heads up so that they could, fix that for the next guest.
Right.
But then it came to nighttime. Do you remember what happened when we put the kids to bed finally?
Yeah, that was crazy. Because we got we got three boys. We've got one infant and another two. They ended up just sleeping. Our older two ended up sleeping in the first room together.
Right.
Totally fine, right? They went down and they went to sleep and they did pretty well, right? But the infant ended up staying in the room with us.
Right.
And
yeah, we have a little pack and play. So he sleeps typically in the room with us. And normally it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Whenever we travel, we just put him in the pack and play and he sleeps all night and it's not a big deal.
But the bed, right? So we couldn't, literally, we couldn't get up out of the bed or into the bed without it being so noisy that it would wake up our infant over and over and over. And I will say he's a fairly light sleeper, so this is kind of a problem, but the bed was also very loud. Like it was loud enough that we had kind of laughed at it when we got into it originally, where it's like, God, I don't think I'd ever gotten into a bed that creaked and groaned and made such a noise every single time you moved. And it wasn't just getting in and getting out. It was like every time you would roll over, right? So you would try to roll over slower, but it would actually make more noise when you did that. So you didn't know what to do, right? You couldn't get comfortable. And so that night ended up being basically our nightmare scenario where our 2-year-old would wake up. We would have to get out of the bed because we got out of the bed and the bed was noisy. It would wake up our infant, right? So now we got 2 kids up and screaming and crying. And then we went to finally go get the other kid in the bed, which it really wasn't the problem.
Right.
We would come back and it would we couldn't get our other infant to sleep. So it was a night where we were already exhausted from traveling,
right.
which we'll get back to in a minute because I think this is a really important point. We were already exhausted from traveling, right? And then we basically have this experience where in and of themselves, everything individually really isn't that big of a deal. But when you add it all up, it really kind of deteriorated the experience that we as guests were having there.
Right.
Because if all these problems weren't there, we would have had a much better night. If just the bed had been fine, and we would have been able to sleep then we probably would have stayed. If it was but it was that was the straw that broke the camel's back for sure. And so we woke up that night. We're definitely not staying. We would rather lose the rest of the money for the rest of the vacation. And we would rather, pay to go someplace else than we would to stay here and deal with this. And, what's really interesting about all this stuff, and the one thing you didn't mention was when we walked in and you looked over to the left, there's wasp spray, 2 gigantic cans of wasp spray within reach of the toddlers, right? Sitting just right there on the window sill,
Which,
right outside the door.
Isn't a big deal, right? We picked them up, we put them away.
Right.
It's not a big deal.
Right.
But yeah, it was quite the experience.
Right.
And what you didn't mention too is that, the 2-year-old waking up, typically he's a fantastic sleeper. He woke up because of the bed. So in the other room across the house with white noise machines that we had brought, he could hear the bed and it scared him. That's how loud this bed was.
Right.
So yeah, definitely an experience. But I think that we learned a lot from it. So, I wish that we hadn't have had that experience the first time, but we did learn a lot from it. And one of the things that we learned is that, value really, really is important, right? I know that when you look at rentals and you're trying to provide a review for them, value is one of the things that you get graded on, right? Did you have a 5-star value or did you have a 1-star value? And a lot of times that's going to be based off of price, right? If you are charging a lower price, then you can get away with a lot more things. But if you're charging a higher price, or if you're perceived to be charging a higher price, because I think that that's important too, perception is reality. If you're charging a higher price, you're going to have to provide a better experience to your guest. Now, in the case of this particular house, maybe that's, a bed that doesn't squeak. Maybe it's, or not squeak, but it makes really loud rackets whenever you get in and out of it. Or maybe it's higher quality furniture that's not falling apart when you sit down on it. Or maybe it's having locks that actually lock and having a house where you're not greeted by bug spray when you first walk in. So all of those things together are adding to this perception of value that the guests have when you walk in. And so I think it's really important for us as hosts when we're trying to portray what that value is that we're providing our guests, but then the value that we're actually providing to them when they walk in, right?
Yeah, first impressions matter.
For sure.
First impressions matter, right? Because I think we've talked about this before, but we actually got to experience it firsthand ourselves. as a host, that first impression when they walk in, if they're already greeted with a can of wasp killer, and then the room kind of feels dingy and feels dirty, which is what this rental felt like, right?
It wasn't actually dirty. It was very
dirty.
clean.
It was very clean, but because of a number of things where it was like a lot of scuff marks on the walls, and because
the floors were more unfinished and the walls weren't painted well.
And again, going back, like you can literally see on the blinds how it's missing blades, for the blinds, so you can see through the blinds. All those things that are kind of add up to this first impression. And again, we were like, okay, like it's totally fine. We'll deal with it for this vacation, right? We were willing to kind of live through it. So we ended up staying that first night. Like we didn't contact them until the next morning after we had that experience overnight.
Right.
But, it really makes a big difference, because when people walk in, that first impression is basically triggering something in most people's minds, I think, where they're saying, okay, like you're already kind of setting off the vacation on a bad foot. But if there's all these kind of small problems, which aren't really problems, but kind of are, what other problems are going to be there, right? You're basically setting yourself up to get a guest who is going to complain about every little thing, and who is going to be nitpicky about, the little bit of dust that they find in the corner of a room, So the first impression really does matter, because at the end of the day, when they walk in and if they see all these kind of small things, you're giving them license to basically look for other things, right? And that's always going to set you up for failure as a host, right? You don't want them walking in and the first thing that they think to themselves is, oh, well, this is already a kind of a rough experience. I wonder what else is going to go wrong,
right?
When they're set up with that mentality, you're basically setting yourself up for failure as a host.
Right. Because they're going to start looking for things, right? If they walk in and they see one thing that looks a little off, like bug spray, right? In and of itself, like we said, not a big deal. But we walked in, we saw bug spray. Well, the first thing that I did after that is I looked for bugs. If there's bug spray there, then I'm going to assume that there are bugs there, and I want to make sure that there aren't any bugs. So I started looking for that. That wouldn't necessarily have been something that I would have done had I not seen the bug spray to begin with. And the same thing for cleaning. We've talked about the importance of cleaners and making sure that the house looks really great when your guests first walk in. If they walk into something that's dirty, if there's a bag of trash that was left, or if there's a rag on the counter, and it was an honest mistake, right? Everybody makes mistakes. But if they see that, they're going to start looking for other things that might be wrong, because that's an indication to them that there was something that didn't go right. And if that didn't go right, then what else could possibly have gone wrong?
100%.
So they're going to be more likely to look for things that they would have been more likely to look over and ignore because they weren't a big deal had that thing not happened.
Yeah, 100%. And so really what this comes down to is, so what happened was we actually made a TikTok about this whole kind of experience that we had, and April was going around and kind of showing everything to TikTok. Well, so this TikTok video blows up, right? Like within a week or 2 weeks, we're up to like 50,000, 60,000 views on it, like 450 comments or whatever. And what's really interesting was the comments that people were making about it. Generally speaking, there's a lot of people who was like, this doesn't seem like it's a big deal, or you're being kind of a Karen or whatever. Like, it was really funny, the people's general responses, which I think led us to think about two things that we've never thought about before.
Right.
The first one is, it's interesting how the photos of a property can, like, the property looked great, right? And I think we should also preface this by saying the place actually had no reviews. It was, in our eyes, it was brand new. It was a brand new property, right? Which, again, we're giving a lot of lenience here to the host. The host was great. He's like, if this is his only property, I'm sure he's learning and I'm sure he's figuring it out. And what was really interesting is the next guest that left a review said that it was like, what was it, a 1 on value or whatever?
Yeah, it said that the value did not meet the expectations.
The value did not meet the expectations. So like, this was like verified, which made us feel really good by the second guest that they had. But anyway, so we posted it. We got a lot of negative comments on, they were like, well, this doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. It's really interesting, though, how the photos of a place that looks very clean and it looks nice. It's funny how when you actually get in there, the feeling that a place gives you can be very different than the look from the pictures, right?
Right.
Just because the interior design is on point and it looks cute doesn't necessarily mean that it feels clean and it feels safe when you walk in and you're actually there as a guest. So I think oftentimes as hosts, the point I'm trying to get to is oftentimes as hosts, we often don't consider how the guest feels when they walk in and they have their first impression, or how the guest feels when they've spent the entire day traveling with their family and they're exhausted. And we don't often put ourselves kind of in our guests' shoes. We just kind of make an assumption about how the guest should feel based on what we think about our property. Right. But if there's one thing in business that I've learned is that what you think about something actually doesn't matter hardly at all. At the end of the day, it's how does the person that you're trying to help or how the person you're trying to serve, how do they feel about that thing, right? And then if you can start making informed decisions based on being in their shoes and thinking about how they feel about something, then that will lead you to make better decisions about how to run your rental as a host.
And you'll be more successful.
Because
that value rating is now going to shoot up. And I mean, you're just overall, you should be doing better. So what's really interesting there is that we've had our rental now for almost a year. And so that was our very first short-term rental. And I remember we were sitting at the dining room table. We were trying to come up with a listing description. Do you remember that? We were sitting there coming up with the description.
This was actually a really big realization for us, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
And we knew it at the time, but it didn't all fully click until after this experience that we had. And so our cabin, it's a brand new cabin, brand new build, really nice 5-bed, 5-bathroom cabin in the Smoky Mountains. And when we were writing the listing, we were like, oh, brand new, great views, luxury cabin. Do you remember that?
I do, yeah.
And about 2 weeks after we had put that up, we looked at it again and we were doing some competitive analysis. We were looking at the other cabins. And I remember looking at you going, wow, this cabin, this one's amazing. Look at that, a steam shower, and it had, towels, and it had really great furnishings and amenities, and it had a pool. And I looked at Nathan and you looked at me, and I think at about the same time, we were like, I don't know that ours is luxury. If this is luxury, I don't think that ours is luxury.
Right.
And
it's nice.
Right.
It's brand new. It's a new construction. It's nice, but nice and luxury are two different things.
Right.
Right. And so this is something that we've talked about a few times on this podcast, but I think that most hosts are not, what's the right word? They're not objective about this idea, right? Where you pull back because you're very proud as a host that rental is your baby, right? Especially when you first start out, you're like, oh, this is the most amazing thing ever. And you're like, I'm going to charge so much money and I'm going to make so much money because this thing is beautiful. But then when you start, and this is why the competitive analysis is so important, because when you really start comparing it with all the other properties that are close by and that are both better, objectively better and objectively worse than yours, then you start really getting a feeling for where yours kind of fits into the marketplace. And I think that that's incredibly important. Ours, we came to the conclusion, is not luxury. Right. It's nice. And it's clean and it's brand new because it's a new construction. It's only been, literally just the final appliance came in a year ago. So it's brand new, but it's not luxury. What is a luxury experience? And so now it's kind of funny because I'll be surfing around on Airbnb and checking out other properties and doing some competitive analysis. There's a lot of people who kind of they throw the term luxury around a lot.
Right.
The problem with that is that you're setting an expectation that cannot be met for most people.
Right.
Right. If you're telling people, hey, this is a luxury experience, and then they just kind of come in and it's a normal rental, it's a normal situation. It could be very clean, which is awesome. It could have a great view, which is awesome. It could be big. It could be a big house, which is awesome. But none of that really translates into the idea of luxury. Right. And so if people paid, let's just throw a number out there and let's say that people paid $500 and they were expecting luxury for $500 and they walk in and you're like, well, $500 is a great value for my rental. It might be a great value, but you told people that they were going to experience luxury. Did they actually experience luxury when they walked in? Is that really the experience that they're going to have? Right. So even if you have a fantastic rental, even if you provide a fantastic experience, well worth $500, you were setting yourself up for failure because you were telling people that they were going to experience something that they didn't ultimately experience.
Right.
And that's the issue, right? You have to make sure that the value that you're offering is exceeding the price you're asking to pay, number one. But then you have to make sure that you're setting the expectation early for what that transaction is going to be, right? And when I say transaction, I mean, are you fulfilling the promise that you're making in your listing. When people look at that property, are they sitting there thinking to themselves, hey, this is amazing? And then when they get there, are you fulfilling the promise that you made to them? That's ultimately where I think a lot of hosts, kind of get in trouble.
For sure. And I think that it also really depends on the market. So we do a lot of competitive analysis every single week. We're on Airbnb and Vrbo and looking at our competition. And if you're in a market where the amenities provided and the quality of the listings provided isn't great, then you might be able to use the word luxury if your place is actually that much better than everybody else.
Sure.
So it's all kind of dependent on what the market dictates, but you have to really know your competition and you have to keep an eye on that, because it could be that your competition decides that everybody's going to renovate and everybody's now going to be able to provide these higher level value and luxury and amenities. And at that point, maybe you can no longer provide the word luxury in your listing. So keeping a tab on that and just making sure that, again, the expectations that you're setting with your potential guest is actually what's going to be delivered when they walk into the rental.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So what's really interesting about this is when I think about the word luxury, it kind of comes down to three things, possibly four, but 3 or 4 things. Number one, it comes down to amenities, right? Are you providing amenities that are above and beyond kind of a normal expectation, right? So everybody in Gatlinburg, Tennessee has got a hot tub, right? Everybody's got kind of the standard 4 to 6 person hot tub. Everybody's kind of got that mid-grade hot tub. Are you providing a hot tub that can fit 10 or 12 people in it? Is it a high-end hot tub experience that you're providing, right? That could maybe push it over into luxury. Most places don't have a steam shower. Are you providing a steam shower in that master bedroom? The finishes in your property, a lot of finishes can kind of move you into that luxury area, the type of appliances, right? So, do you have double stoves instead of one stove? The location does, I think, determine a little bit of the luxury status for sure, but that's not the only thing that determines luxury status. Just having views, again, like we were saying earlier, doesn't necessarily determine or make it luxury. To me, it kind of comes down to the finishes of the home. Typically the size and the experience that people have there, and the amenities that you're providing. Those kind of things is what kind of moves you into that luxury status. But probably more so than anything, it's the experience they're having, right? And so it's it comes down to little things. To be very frank with you, we don't necessarily do this right now. We could have spent 10 times more on towels to have very, very thick, luxurious towels, right? That's something that contributes to the experience that a guest has when they're at your rental. We don't necessarily do that.
Right.
But we also don't set the expectation that ours is a luxury rental.
Right. We took that word out of our listing.
So those are just a couple of things to kind of keep in the back of your mind. And luxury, guys, is subjective, right? When one person walks into a luxury property, they're like, whoa, this is luxurious. Another person could walk in and go, yeah, this is great. It's good. Is it luxurious? Probably not. But so it's subjective. And that's one of the reasons why we usually recommend for hosts not to necessarily use the word luxurious. You don't want there to be any ambiguity in your listing. I think that's very important. Right. If there's something that could be held subjectively, that needs to come out. Because anything that's subjective, again, you're kind of setting yourself up for potential problems with guests that you have.
Yeah. I mean, anytime, the rule that we live by, the rule that, my opinion, everybody should rule by is, under promise and over deliver. Yeah. If you do that consistently, then every single time you're going to be rated high on that value, because you didn't promise anything, or you under promised, what you actually have, but then you went above and beyond when that guest actually got there.
100%. Well, this is really interesting. I think the next one that we should record in just a few minutes for the next episode should be talking a little bit more about those comments that we got on TikTok, because it was really interesting.
Yeah. I gotta say, I felt personally attacked by some of them, but not everybody was wrong. And again, perception's reality, right? That was somebody's opinion, and we're gonna take that and we're going to learn from it, and we're going to make some changes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Really quickly before we leave, tell everybody about how the rental is doing. How is that performing this year?
Yeah. So
is it meeting expectation?
So right now, yes, talking about our expectations. So our rental right now, we are in mid-October. I believe it's October 11th, 11th or 12th. And right now, this week, we just hit our goal for the year. So when we first bought our cabin, we were projecting that we would do about $140,000 in revenue this year. And we got a Thanksgiving booking just last week for Thanksgiving, which pushed us over our $150,000 goal for the year. And so now we have our sights set on 160 before the end of the year. And it looks like we probably will hit that. And we're pretty excited for that since it's, our first year and everything's looking good.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, we're really stoked for it. And we still have with Thanksgiving booked, but we still have Christmas that hasn't booked yet, New Year's that hasn't booked yet. So we still have some major opportunity coming up for bookings. So that's really cool.
Yeah, so it's looking great. A lot of the things that we put into practice as far as pricing goes and expectations and value that we're providing guests, it seems like it's working. And so we're continuing on with that. Our cabin right now, I believe, has a 4.98 rating. We've had probably about 45 guests now that have stayed over the past year. So we're pretty proud of that rating and we're working to improve it. Actually, just this week, we ordered some supplies for a coffee bar. So we're going to be installing that here in the coming days.
Yeah, cool. Well, guys, thank you for joining us. Hopefully the conversation was interesting and hopefully insightful. If you're a new investor who's getting your own rental up and going and you're planning on self-managing, definitely kind of think about some of the things that we talked about because it will help you maximize the potential of that property and to consistently offer an incredible experience to your guests. Guys, my name is Nathan. This is April. Thanks for joining us. Until next time.
See you next time.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Hopefully this was really helpful to you in your journey of building a business. If you like what you heard, please click subscribe and go to iTunes and give us a rating. That helps us out tremendously when we're producing hopefully content of huge value to you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, and I hope that you have an amazing week. Go out there and crush it. I'll see you soon.